Welcome. The Engagedly podcast is, of course, brought to you by Engagedly. Engagedly is a progressive performance management tool and people enablement platform. What we discuss on this podcast is everything from engagement topics to performance topics to Aaron making some of the best dad jokes of all time. I'm your host, William Miller. Let's get started. Today's guest in the intro is for Gordon Rapkin. Gordon is the CEO and has an amazing past, but I'll let Gordon tell a little bit about himself, and then we have a special question lined up for
So thank you, William. I'm the CEO at Zift Solutions. We're in the channel management space. So any company that sells indirectly through channels of distribution, we're sort of the operating system for that. My background is I've been a serial CEO multiple times, multiple companies, and I've been associated with Engagedly now for several years, working with the company as an advisor and as a customer. We use the product, we love it, employee base is on Engagedly. So hit me with your question.
my favorite question to ask any person, but I'm really interested to see what your answer is. And it's, if you had one breakfast food for the rest of your life, that's it. That's all you got is this one thing. What would it be and why?
This is really easy. So down in the financial district in Manhattan, all the way down towards Battery Park, there is a bagel shop called Leo's Bagels, and they make the best bagels on the planet. It's a tiny little shop. In pre-COVID, it was always jammed with people. So I would do Leo's Bagels, but even more specifically, Leo makes a whole wheat sesame bagel. That's the one.
A healthy choice as well. It's going to,
Hey, it's the rest of my life,
skyrocket your day with a little healthy choice.
Genius. That's why he's a CEO, Will, because he knew this is long term.
Our first episode of the Engage HR podcast was actually directly at the kind of cusp of this digital transformation, right? Or the whole change with COVID. Now that we are 3 to 4 months into work from home, what has your company done or adapted to doing differently? And with that being said, what's going really well right now?
We closed our offices on March 11th, and I have to say we sort of shut the door and ran away. And there wasn't a lot of thought about let's plan this out. How are we going to work from home? How's everything going to go? And so all of a sudden everyone's thrust into a work from home environment. And initially it was people had things to do and they were working on them, and so they just did them at home. We're a tech company, everything's in the cloud, so it wasn't a big transition. It wasn't like we suddenly walked away and the machinery was left behind. We took our laptops home with us, but we really hadn't sort of embraced the idea that we're all going to be remote and we're not going to be sitting in meetings together in a physical room, and we're not going to be going out to dinner together or whatever. I think as that started to settle in, you kind of get this work from home fatigue. If you haven't been a remote worker up until that point, there's a certain amount of fatigue that sets in where every day is the same. You don't know whether it's Monday or it's Sunday or it's Thursday or they're just all the same. And I think that we started to find that things that went well were that people were probably more productive in some areas because they weren't getting interrupted, and there was no water cooler talk. You can go into the break room other than your refrigerator. But there were also a handful of people that were suddenly thrust into a workaholic environment. They were trying to be accommodating to everyone, and they had a kind of a mentality of, well, I'm not in the office, so I'm going to have to prove I'm working really hard. So they would be accommodating to anybody that wanted to meet with them at any time, day or night, any day. And that I think started to contribute towards burnout for some of them, and for others, it's just become their way of working to the point where as a company, we've had to kind of give people permission and make it known to them that, hey, it's okay to take some time off.
Yeah.
Like just because you're working from home, and even if time off now doesn't mean you're going to go to the beach or the islands, it's okay to just take time off, even if you're just at home. Take some time off, disconnect. That's been a transition that I think a lot of people have struggled with. We're a company that spans a lot of time zones, kind of all around the world. Tiny little company, but we have offices in a lot of time zones, and it's particularly hard to get the time zones lined up for people who are working from home. They either they're busy in the morning with the family, or they're busy in the night with the family, but they can't kind of connect it the same way they used to. And so that's been a bit of a struggle for us. On the what's worked well, I would say that we've worked really hard on staying connected and recognizing that you're not going to see people in the office when you come in and say, hey, you know, how was your night? How was your weekend? We've actually worked really hard on being connected. A couple of things that we adopted virtually that you would otherwise do probably physically. One was there's a practice in Sweden. I used to run a company in Sweden, and there's a practice in Sweden called fika, which is once or twice a day, everybody in the office comes out of their offices and sits in a common area and has a cup of coffee together. And we adapted that to the virtual world. And so we have a daily fika meeting where we don't talk about business. It's like, you know, what have you watched on Netflix lately? Or, you know, what are you doing this weekend? Or what's a good park to go to? But it's been really good just to get connected. And it's only 15 minutes long, and that's it. And we go back to whatever we were doing. We also started a virtual pub. And so we practice in the UK. We have a big office in Oxford, England. Practice in the UK is everybody to go to the pub on Friday afternoon, Friday evening. And so we started 2 virtual pubs, one in the UK that for us in the US starts at 11. So we don't, I've tried to avoid day drinking. In the UK, it starts at 11, which is more like 4 or 5 o'clock their time. And in the US, we have one that starts Friday somewhere around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's been amazing to me. We get 20, 30, 40 people that'll come to the pub, and they'll be hanging out till 7 or 8 o'clock at night on a Friday. And in the US pub, we get people from the UK pub after the pub closes coming and joining the US pub. So it's just been a way to keep connected. I've been told it's humanized a lot of management quite a bit. They kind of get to see us in a different light, and so that was good. I think it's a challenge for everyone.
I like how you said the humanization, like managers showing that, or leaders even showing that they're human and they're vulnerable. That goes a long way to like people rallying around you and identifying with you. You don't seem like you're in the ivory tower. They connect with you on that more personal level. When you're talking about the pub, I kept thinking to myself, have you ever had to kick somebody out of the virtual pub? Should people invest in a virtual bouncer for their own virtual pub?
I wouldn't be surprised.
So one of the things you and I and Will were talking about the other day was, really this idea about, you said these time zones are different. It's finding that rhythm, right? Making sure that it's that organizational rhythm. And so how do you help managers and the organization find that rhythm? Like what works?
Rhythm has been a real interesting topic for us, because in a work for home environment, you have people that are, they're not used to working from home. And so, they're on their Zoom meetings or WebEx or GoToMeetings, and you can tell they're in the pink bedroom with the stuffed animals behind them. And, they're not in an office kind of setting. In particular, in different cultures, the houses are different. So in our case, we have folks who, their houses just don't have a place to have an office. And it's pretty common in the UK that they're not sort of constructed in a way where they all have a place to go with an office. In the US, it's a little more common to have some more space. When you do that, then you realize that you've got people on these calls that, you schedule a time for a call, and somebody shows up and they've got a kid on their lap and they've got 3 others that are screaming in the background, and or it's right across the lunchtime hour and you need to give them some space to actually feed their families, whatever. And so we started talking about this pretty openly about how do people get their rhythm down and then collaborate with their team to make sure that their team understands this is my rhythm. So if you know that the person you need to collaborate with has a family around them that needs to be fed every day at noon, then don't schedule your meetings at noon, and you come to some collaborative agreement about that. You can't just assume that someone's going to work late into the evening or early in the morning, but they may be. And if they're open about that and they say, like on Tuesdays, I'm good for 7 o'clock calls or whatever, that giving and taking between a team, I think, becomes really important. It helps sort of de-stress the environment of having conflicting activities going on all around you. It's a way for managers to get more connected, like to help their teams to understand that as a team, we need to figure out our rhythm of working together. I mentioned to you, Aaron, we have folks in the Pacific coast of the US and folks in the Central Europe. That's a lot of time zones in between them. And so if the person in the Pacific coast of the US says, well, I'm not getting up before 10 o'clock in the morning, West Coast time. Well, that's already, late into the evening, Central Europe time. So they have to kind of get to okay, well, when are we going to talk, and when are meetings acceptable? And I think that's all part of the building a rhythm for the collaboration across the team, and managers really need to help facilitate that. They need to help, make it a safe space for someone to say, I just can't do this at this time. They need to be able to say, what time will they do it?
When we talk about teams coming together, like we form, right? We storm, and then we normalize. That normalization now is exactly that actually comes in that conversation now, which is interesting because we never thought that was part of the norming. It was always behavior based, but now it's like availability. Like when can we connect, right? Given my home environment, given yours, and it's that other layer of complexities.
Forming, storming, norming is exactly right, but I don't think anybody, at least we didn't, think that work from home, close down the offices meant we have to go all the way back to the beginning and start over. The teams were already there. They were all working. Everything was fine. Just work from home. You got to figure out, no, it starts over. It's do this again.
We are kind of changing things up, as the management structure alters just slightly. What tools have you kind of worked into the process at Zift that have been really successful within those teams, or what tools just in general?
The primary tool that every company I think has adopted is video conferencing, and we're a WebEx shop because somewhere in the past we signed a multi-year contract with WebEx, but they're all pretty much interchangeable. A real important element we have a cameras on policy, and we really insist that people, if possible, if they're not in the pink fuzzy bathrobe with bunny slippers, we expect them to be with their camera on, and it gives you the a little bit better than an audio only, but not quite as good as an in-person. But we really have adopted the video conferencing as our tool. And then in one-to-one, we're a Slack shop, and we grew our usage of Slack considerably as a result of the work from home. We ended up adding to our Slack channels a whole lot of places for people to discuss different topics. I think we do a bunch of that in Engagedly as well, where there's just, opportunities for people to talk about topics that may or may not be totally work related, but keeping people connected. We have had to adopt a lot more of sort of project management types of tools. So we adopted a product called Monday. We use it extensively. We have been a big Trello shop before that. We kind of migrated a bit of that to Monday, kept a little bit on Trello. We've sort of tried to grab as many things as we can. I'd say our use of the Google platform has increased considerably because it has really good collaborative tools for us. So Google Sheets and Google Docs and all of that has been where we might have in the past been a bit more Microsoft Office focused. We're a bit more Google focused today. So it's, I think everything has got a collaborative bent to it, and the tools that we've adopted have all been about how to stay connected. It's really turning work from home into work together.
You talked about a lot of the platforms. How are you managing some of the recognition aspects, right? When you're praising individuals, or maybe some of those things you did that really called out some of the good work or the milestones of the company. Where's that being taken care of, and how are you guys managing that?
In the past, we would be gathered in a bunch of conference rooms in different offices, and then we'd have a whole lot of people remotely calling in.
Yeah.
We have a process in place for recognition that we utilize your platform as well as other vehicles, just to say it's a nomination process, and based on the nominations, we recognize people, but now it's all virtual. And we actually had an interesting application of it. So we've been doing this forever, with recognition at a company setting, and we have several criteria that create topic areas that we recognize people in. There's 3 or 4 of them. For one of our company meetings, we took everyone to an animal farm by hiring an animal farm to walk around with their video camera and introduce us to all the animals. So we invited all the kids and all the friends and relatives and anybody, and then we did our recognition at that meeting. And so it was a really special opportunity for recognizing employees in front of their family members. Took it to another level than just in front of their peers that they work with.
That's true work-life integration there. Gordon.
I was gonna say.
That is well played.
The pig was my favorite. They had a pig with a name, and he was just that was the best animal.
With Monday, with different project management tools, have you seen like a spike in not only productivity but also like whole entire teams just thriving in this environment? Just getting stuff done, knocking stuff out a little bit quicker than they were before.
I would say that's a mixed bag. Yes, in some areas. One of the areas, our engineering team has been particularly productive, and I'm not sure exactly why that is, but maybe they have less interruptions. They've been particularly productive during this time. I think there's some other areas of the business where we had much more of a face-to-face environment with our customer base that's been a little less productive because it's harder to get a hold of customers for the same reason. You don't have that collaborative rhythm with them that you used to have. I think you have to balance isolation and productivity, and is the role fulfilling still? Some people kind of interpret it as they're on vacation, and that doesn't work. Just because you're at home doesn't mean you're on vacation. I do think, though, that as a company, in the handful of months since we closed the doors and ran away, we've definitely settled into much more of a productive environment of working together, which I'm sure is true for lots of companies. I think everybody's been forced into this, and it really changes your outlook for where does this take us in the future? Let's get past COVID, and then what? In our case, we just sent out a survey to our whole employee base, trying to understand people's sentiments about going back into an office. If you went back, would you be doing your job better, or are you doing your job better where you are today? And how do you feel about going back? I think the office setting is going to turn into much more of a social environment for when you need to be face to face in a meeting room and when you need to kind of hang out with people, and much less about sitting in a cube and doing your job by yourself.
Yeah.
That you can do from home.
I would agree with you, Gordon. We had somebody new start on my team, and we pick a day that we're in the office, and that day's collaboration, right? We're going to whiteboard. We're going to do things that you can do virtually, but you can do better in person. So I think it's almost like when we think about the way we use technology, it's like it doesn't replace the human. The inflection of the human becomes more important. So you put them into the system and say, where do I need the person in the decision-making process? And I think then the way we treat the work environment would be the same. Right? We might say, where do I need to be talking with Gordon in person to work through this idea, or to structure something, and what can we do equally as well virtually? I think that question, the way we structure work going forward, we have that flexibility. Like you said, we are forced into this. Some people see it as vacation, and some people see it as work, and we talked about that in the beginning. That's a tough thing to grapple with, right? Because if you want security, you want to do your work, maybe they're finding security in the work, but ultimately they're overworking themselves at some point because they're so conscientious, right? And they want to be looked at as good. So are they turning it off? And then at what point, how long can they do that for? What do you see as what's next? Like, as you see, like, is there going to be an end to this, or what are your thoughts kind of having that foresight as a CEO? Like, what do you see lies ahead of us?
I think that right now the unknowns are far beyond the knowns. And so the unknowns are pretty extreme right now. We are thinking about the next 6 months or so. And we had a conversation just the other day about when do we think it will be reasonable to be back into our offices, and can we give some certainty to people about that? Like, can we give them certainty, at least on the negative side, to say we won't be back in the office before this date, even if we may not be back on that date. So I think that's going to go on for a while. I mean, everybody is sort of guessing about the future with COVID, but I believe that in our case, the work from home is going to take root, and we'll probably be a company that ultimately will have a lot less office space, and the space we have will be either more hoteling where people are coming and going, or more meeting rooms where we're there for a purpose. As you said, Aaron, you need to get together with a whiteboard because it just works better. And so I think that's going to be a pretty big change. So I'm somebody who traveled well over 100,000 miles a year. I'm a road warrior, and I went cold turkey in March. I haven't been back on an airplane since March, and I was thinking about how many hours I used to spend on airplanes, and they were productive hours for the most part, although I did watch movies. But suddenly that freed up my calendar. I'm not traveling. You don't have to say, well, I can't meet with you on Monday because I'll be on a plane. That doesn't happen anymore. And our whole culture around travel has changed dramatically. As a company, we saw face-to-face as being pretty important. And I still think that there's an aspect of, you have a meeting day with people, maybe with clients. They come into the office and you meet with them in a conference room for the day, and it's business and it's hard. And then you take them out to dinner and it's social and you build rapport and relationships. I think that's a problem in the virtual world that you got to solve somehow. I don't know how we were going to solve that particularly with clients.
Yeah.
The customer side of it, you're either a vendor or you're a friend. And we like to talk about our customers as being our friends, but it's a lot harder to build friendships when all you're doing it on is Zoom.
On the other side, in the business, like within the business, fatigue of employees, people being way too productive, people trying to be like, I'm doing great. I'm just kind of getting out of control that way. What's your biggest piece of advice or something that you've learned during this time as an executive that you'd like to share with kind of others, or something you would like to spotlight for other people?
I think we've been talking about it. I think being connected is the biggest challenge, and that, from an executive's perspective, it's the thing you got to really focus on. How do you keep the organization connected so that you actually have a culture in this environment? I think that a lot of the role of the CEO and the senior leadership of a company is about culture. If you've done your hiring well, you've got talented people, they're pretty good to go. You give them guidance and leadership, but they're pretty good to go. And so it all comes down to culture. It's what I liked about Engagedly. It's about engagement. The statistics I've read are that frequently when people leave a company, the number one thing they talk about is their connection with their manager or their belief in the leadership. In this time, that's about being connected to them. We talked about being vulnerable, being open, but it's all about connectedness. And I think that's how do I just keep sort of hold the business together in the form of the people? Because if you hold them together, they'll do their jobs. They're good at their jobs, but they sort of drift when there's no, connection points.
And building meaningful connections too. Some people just connect, and then to provide that depth, like you were talking about before, like being vulnerable, like having honest conversations. I mean, you guys do a lot of great stuff around that. That's a pretty good and a pretty high bar for a lot of executives out there that I don't know if it's necessarily the norm, and maybe it's because you're a serial CEO. It's for a reason, Gordon.
My mother used to say it's because I couldn't keep a job, but
Gordon, really appreciate your time. And now we're kind of moving on to kind of closing thoughts. Now, Gordon, on this little podcast, we like to give a little bit at the end just to kind of let you plug whatever you want to plug, or just talk about whatever you want to talk about. Is there anything you'd like to kind of close us off with?
If it's a plug, I would say one of the things that we as a company do is we help companies to sell through channels of distribution, but what we do is it's a digital environment. And one of the things that's been going on in this COVID time period has been an acceleration in the digital transformation that companies are going through. And it's been a really interesting time for the companies we serve, because they are used to selling through smaller company partnerships that are more face-to-face. They do a golf outing, they do a seminar in a hotel with some stale Danish. And so it's been really interesting for us guiding a digital transformation. And the words digital transformation have been so overused over the last year or two or three or four, but now it's real. Like they have no choice. They have to move to virtual, they have to move to digital. And so it's been really interesting to watch. What we're finding in our customer base and in the market that we serve is that indirect channels of distribution are becoming ultimately more important to companies, because their salespeople just can't be multiplied as quickly. And so it's a force multiplier. And in that force multiplier, it's all about giving them the tools to be effective digitally. And that's kind of where we are. So it's a good time for what we do. And I put that as the plug.
Zift Solutions. It's a good time. that's the one-liner.
I'm actually going to borrow it from you, Gordon, right? We talked about the importance of finding your rhythm. I think the importance of finding your rhythm is just listen, right? Just listen and you'll find your rhythm.
I like it. But Gordon, I appreciate it again.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Gordon.
I'm eager to see what you do with it.
Right,
Absolutely. Take care.